I have a story to talk about with the great Garry Marshall. Garry Marshall passed away this week, and there are many people, you'll see pictures of Garry, there are many people that have stories how he affected their career. And that's the only reason I'm really talking about him. And what happened was I was coming into the studio today and I turned on the radio to 97.1, which happens to be an oldie but goodie station here in Las Vegas. And guess what? The Stones were singing and You Can Make a Grown Man Cry came up. And to tell you the truth, I really didn't cry when I heard about Garry Marshall's passing. And you may find that cold, but it wasn't. Because inside my heart, I knew what kind of a man he was. He was terrific, and he helped a lot of people, writers, directors, and other people that worked on the show. He had 5 shows when I talked to him, and I'm going to tell you a little story which is important to me to remember Garry Marshall by. My condolences, of course, go out to his family, his children, his friends, people he worked with, relatives, and people that may have hated him only because they didn't get their way. But I got to tell you, he was terrific with me. And to walk it back a bit, back in the day I worked on the Beretta Show with Robert Blake, and I told the story, I think, during Flashback Friday. I think it was last week, wasn't it, John? With the Beretta story?
Yes.
And I was on with him for a couple of weeks. I hated it, not because of Robert Blake, but I hated the show because it was an 18-hour workday. And I was trying to raise my son, who was about 12, 13 at that time. And so the hours were lengthy, so I kind of wanted to go to another show, a sitcom perhaps that had less hours. So one day, Robert Blake came up to me and he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, I'd like to have you stay with me. I know this is a short-term thing for you. I said, well, I got an opportunity to go somewhere else. And he said, where? And I said, Mork and Mindy. And he said, who's that? And I said, it's Robin Williams coming in from San Francisco. So I did. I went over to Mork and Mindy, and of course I met Garry Marshall and worked there for a couple of years. Howard Storm directed. He was a terrific director. He backed me up later on in life, and I appreciated that too. But here's the story. It took a long way to get there, but here's the story. One day I thought that I was ready to direct, and I was working as an assistant director. Well, it's kind of hard to bounce up. And Garry would come with his entourage of maybe 15, 18 people. And on Monday, he would come to the Mork and Mindy show, and he would listen to the readings. Had the actors were all there, the writers were there, network was there, and Garry would pronounce his whatever he liked or disliked about the script. He would go off on his way. And then on Tuesday, he would go to another show that's already had their reading. And on Wednesday, he would go to a rehearsal to see how that was coming along. And on Thursday, he would go through the camera technical things. And on Friday, or whatever day that show fell on, he would go there with an audience. Well, anyway, after the reading, everybody left. And he and his entourage were walking down the street at Paramount Studios in Hollywood. And he had all these people around him. He had his person that guided him in his eating habits, because his eating was very, very hard to control. So he had somebody picking out lunches and that sort of thing. He had his associate producers, his editors on all 5 of his shows, which is Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Who's Watching the Kids, Mork and Mindy, 1 or 2 others. And me, thinking I'm a hotshot, and I'm young, and I'm a punk, I go in between all these folks, worm my way up to him as we're all walking along, and I said, Mr. Marshall, can I have a second of your time? And he said, sure, Don. And I said, you know my name? And he says, absolutely. You're doing a fine job, and we like you here. He said, what do you want? Now, all the other people that were standing around kind of leaned in to find out what I was going to ask Mr. Marshall, walking along, going to another show they were. And I said, I would really like to direct, Garry, if I can. And he said, he kind of smiled at me, and people were all listening to what he was going to answer. He said, well, I can't do it now, Don, but I'll tell you what. You go out and get yourself another show, come in, and we'll talk and see what we can do. I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. I'll see you later. And they walked off. And I walked back to the studio. So I promptly gave a 2 week notice to Bruce and Dale McCraven, Bruce Johnson, producers. And they had a big party for me at the end of the 2 weeks. I mean, it was a big deal. Had cake and pictures and all kinds of stuff. And I went over to Benson and directed a show over there for Tony Thomas, who was another guy who really helped me out and is really a terrific person. And then I went back to Garry Marshall, and I walked in with my tape. I said, here it is. Now, Tony Marshall, his father, was standing in there with a beautiful suit on, tanned, cigar. I mean, real Italiano, you know what I mean? And Garry Marshall said to me, okay, Don, I got to make some maneuvering. I got to change some people, but let's see what we can do, and I'll back you up. And I said, thank you. Went back to the set. A couple of weeks later, they maneuvered me into first assistant director, which was an easy transition, and that was it. And then later on, I directed more committee with John Winters and had a great time. And I owe Mr. Marshall my career, because he was the one that said, go do it, and I'll do it. He was one of the rare people that actually said and did what he said before it. He was an honest man. I didn't cry today when I heard that song, but in my heart, I sure missed a fine gentleman.